The tension in Genoa City had reached a breaking point ever since the shocking and untimely death of Darlene, a woman whose complicated past and tangled relationships left behind more questions than answers, and as whispers turned into accusations, one name kept surfacing in hushed conversations and suspicious glances: Leslie, whose calm exterior masked a storm of secrets that no one had fully uncovered. In the days leading up to Darlene's death, there had been subtle but undeniable signs of conflict between the two women: sharp exchanges at public events, cryptic warnings delivered behind closed doors, and a growing sense that something far more dangerous than a simple rivalry was unfolding beneath the surface. Darlene had recently hinted to several people, including close confidants, that she was on the verge of exposing a truth that could destroy lives, though she never clarified exactly what she meant, leaving those around her both intrigued and uneasy. Meanwhile, Leslie had been acting increasingly erratic, missing meetings, avoiding eye contact, and reacting defensively whenever Darlene's name was mentioned, which only fueled speculation that she had something to hide. On the night of the tragedy, the timeline became a puzzle that investigators and residents alike struggled to piece together. Darlene was last seen leaving a gathering visibly shaken after a heated confrontation with Leslie, and hours later, she was found dead under circumstances that suggested more than just an accident. The official report remained inconclusive, citing a lack of definitive evidence pointing to foul play, but that did little to quiet the storm of suspicion brewing throughout the community. As details slowly emerged, inconsistencies began to surface. Security footage that conveniently cut out at critical moments, a mysterious phone call Darlene received shortly before her death, and witnesses who claimed to have seen Leslie near the scene despite her insistence that she had been elsewhere. Leslie, for her part, maintained her innocence with unwavering determination, insisting that her conflict with Darlene had been blown out of proportion and that she had no reason to harm her, yet even her closest allies couldn't ignore the cracks in her story. What made matters even more complicated was the revelation that Darlene had been investigating something deeply personal, something connected to a secret from years ago that tied directly back to Leslie, a secret that, if exposed, could ruin reputations and upend lives. As the investigation intensified, alliances began to shift, with some characters standing firmly by Leslie's side while others grew convinced that she was hiding a dark truth. Emotional confrontations became inevitable, with accusations flying and long-buried resentments bubbling to the surface, creating an atmosphere thick with tension and distrust. In one particularly explosive moment, a close friend of Darlene confronted Leslie, demanding to know what really happened that night, only to be met with a chilling response that raised even more questions than it answered. Flashbacks revealed glimpses of the past, painting a picture of a relationship between Leslie and Darlene that was far more complex than anyone had realized, one built on shared history, betrayal, and unresolved pain that had festered over time. As viewers are drawn deeper into the mystery, every new clue seems to point in multiple directions, making it nearly impossible to determine where the truth lies. Was Leslie driven by desperation to silence Darlene before her secret could be exposed, or is she being framed by someone else who stands to gain from the chaos? The possibility of a larger conspiracy looms, suggesting that Darlene's death may be just one piece of a much bigger puzzle involving multiple players with their own hidden agendas. Meanwhile, Leslie's behavior grows increasingly unpredictable as the pressure mounts, her composure slipping in rare but telling moments that hint at a deeper internal struggle. Whether she is guilty or simply overwhelmed by the weight of suspicion remains unclear, but one thing is certain: the truth about Darlene's death is far from being revealed, and when it finally comes to light, it will have devastating consequences for everyone involved. As secrets continue to unravel and loyalties are tested, the question persists in the minds of everyone watching: is Leslie truly responsible for Darlene's tragic fate, or is she just another victim in a web of deception that has yet to fully reveal itself? The aftermath of Darlene's death only deepened the mystery, as grief quickly gave way to suspicion and fear, and the once tightly connected circle of friends and rivals in Genoa City began to fracture under the weight of unanswered questions. Leslie found herself at the center of a growing storm, not just because of her history with Darlene, but because of the subtle inconsistencies that continued to surface in her version of events, each one adding another layer of doubt that even she seemed unable to fully dispel. Despite her repeated claims of innocence, there was an unmistakable shift in how people looked at her. Lingering stares, hushed conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room, and an unspoken understanding that something about her story simply didn't add up. Yet, just as the pressure seemed ready to break her, a new revelation emerged that threatened to turn everything upside down. A hidden journal belonging to Darlene, discovered among her personal belongings, filled with cryptic entries that hinted at manipulation, fear, and a looming danger that she had been trying desperately to escape. What made the journal even more unsettling was the way it described someone close to her, someone she once trusted, who had become increasingly unpredictable and dangerous, someone who knew all her secrets and had the power to destroy her. While the entries never explicitly named Leslie, the implications were impossible to ignore, and for many, it felt like confirmation of what they had already begun to suspect. However, as the contents of the journal were examined more closely, a different narrative began to take shape, one that suggested Darlene may have been entangled in something far more complicated than a personal feud. References to financial discrepancies, coded messages, and an unnamed third party hinted at a broader conspiracy that extended beyond just Leslie, raising the possibility that Darlene had been caught in the crosshairs of something much larger and more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. This new angle forced even the most convinced skeptics to reconsider their assumptions, introducing the idea that Leslie might not be the mastermind behind Darlene's death, but rather a piece of a much more intricate puzzle. Still, that didn't fully absolve her, especially when another bombshell dropped. Phone records revealed that Leslie had indeed contacted Darlene multiple times on the night of her death, contradicting her earlier statement that they hadn't spoken at all. When confronted with this evidence, Leslie's composure cracked in a rare and telling moment, her carefully constructed calm giving way to visible panic before she quickly regained control and offered a revised explanation that only partially addressed the discrepancy. To some, it was the reaction of a guilty person scrambling to cover her tracks. To others, it was the response of someone overwhelmed and cornered, struggling to keep her life from unraveling. Meanwhile, tensions escalated as those closest to Darlene began conducting their own informal investigation, unwilling to rely solely on official channels that seemed to be moving frustratingly slow. Old relationships were re-examined under a new light, and secrets that had long been buried began to surface, each one adding another layer of complexity to an already tangled web. One particularly shocking discovery involved a past incident that connected both Leslie and Darlene to a scandal that had been quietly covered up years ago, a scandal involving betrayal, financial ruin, and a mysterious figure who had disappeared without a trace. The more this connection was explored, the clearer it became that whatever happened in the past had not been fully resolved, and that Darlene's recent actions may have been an attempt to finally bring the truth to light. If that was the case, then her death might not have been a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated move to keep that truth from ever being revealed. As suspicion widened, new suspects began to emerge, each with their own motives and secrets, diluting the once singular focus on Leslie and transforming the investigation into a sprawling mystery with no clear resolution in sight. Yet, despite the shifting narrative, Leslie remained a central figure, her every move scrutinized and her every word dissected for hidden meaning. What made her situation even more compelling was the growing sense that she herself was hiding something, not necessarily Darlene's murder, but a truth so significant that she was willing to risk everything to keep it buried. In private moments, away from prying eyes, Leslie was seen grappling with an internal conflict that suggested guilt, fear, or perhaps both, raising the possibility that her connection to Darlene's death was more indirect, but no less consequential. Then came a moment that changed everything. A previously unknown witness came forward, claiming to have seen an argument between Darlene and another individual shortly before her death, someone who did not match Leslie's description but whose identity remained unclear. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community, challenging the prevailing narrative and opening the door to an entirely new line of inquiry. Could it be that Leslie had been a convenient scapegoat all along? Or was this just another layer of deception designed to divert attention from the truth? As more pieces of the puzzle fell into place, it became increasingly evident that nothing about Darlene's death was as straightforward as it initially seemed. In the midst of all this, the emotional toll on those involved continued to mount, with relationships pushed to their limits and trust becoming a rare and fragile commodity. Friendships were tested, alliances were broken, and the line between truth and deception grew ever more blurred. Leslie, once a figure of quiet confidence, now stood at the center of a storm that threatened to consume her, her fate hanging in the balance as the search for answers continued. Whether she would ultimately be revealed as the architect of Darlene's tragic end or as a tragic figure caught in a web of circumstances beyond her control remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The truth, when it finally emerged, would be more shocking and more devastating than anyone could have imagined, reshaping lives and leaving a lasting impact on everyone touched by the tragedy. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere surrounding Darlene's death grew even more suffocating, with every new revelation adding fuel to a fire that refused to burn out, and Leslie, whether guilty or not, remained trapped at the center of it all, a woman whose every move now seemed to carry the weight of suspicion and consequence. What once appeared to be a straightforward case of personal conflict had now evolved into something far more layered, as investigators quietly began to acknowledge that the truth might involve multiple players, intersecting motives, and a timeline deliberately obscured by lies, omissions, and carefully constructed alibis. Yet even as the focus broadened, there was something about Leslie that continued to draw attention, something unresolved and unsettling that made it impossible to fully look away from her as a key piece of the puzzle. Behind closed doors, Leslie's world was beginning to crack in ways she could no longer control. Her isolation became increasingly apparent, with even those who once defended her now keeping their distance, unsure of what to believe or who to trust. In private, her composure faltered more frequently, revealing flashes of desperation that hinted at a deeper truth struggling to break free. She began revisiting places tied to her past with Darlene, quiet corners, old meeting spots, forgotten moments that now seemed loaded with meaning, as if searching for something she had lost or perhaps trying to make sense of how everything had spiraled so far out of control. These moments, though unseen by most, painted a portrait of a woman haunted not just by suspicion, but by memory, regret, and an unspoken fear that whatever secret she carried was on the verge of being exposed. At the same time, the investigation took a dramatic turn when forensic details, long delayed, finally surfaced with unsettling implications. Subtle traces found at the scene suggested the presence of more than one individual, reinforcing the growing theory that Darlene's death was not the result of a single impulsive act, but something far more deliberate and possibly orchestrated. This discovery sent shockwaves through those who had been convinced of Leslie's sole involvement, forcing them to reconsider the possibility that she may not have acted alone, or perhaps had not been the one to act at all. Still, the evidence did not fully exonerate her. Instead, it placed her in an even more complicated position, one where she could be either a participant, a witness, or someone being strategically framed. Then came another chilling development, a piece of audio recovered from Darlene's phone, recorded unintentionally during what appeared to be a tense confrontation shortly before her death. Though the quality was poor and much of the conversation was obscured, certain fragments stood out, raised voices, a plea for silence, and a line that sent a ripple of unease through everyone who heard it. "If you don't stop, I'll make sure you never get the chance." The voice was not immediately identifiable, but speculation ran rampant, with many insisting it sounded like Leslie, while others argued that it could belong to someone else entirely. The ambiguity only deepened the mystery, creating a divide between those convinced of Leslie's guilt and those beginning to question whether the truth was being deliberately distorted. Meanwhile, a new character entered the unfolding drama, someone from Darlene's past whose sudden reappearance raised more questions than answers. This individual, long thought to be out of the picture, seemed to possess knowledge that could potentially unravel everything, yet their motives remained unclear. Their interactions with Leslie were particularly telling, marked by a tension that suggested a shared history neither of them was willing to fully acknowledge. In one especially charged encounter, the two exchanged cryptic remarks that hinted at a secret so significant it could change the entire narrative, leaving anyone who witnessed it with the unmistakable sense that the truth had been buried for years and was now clawing its way back to the surface. As pressure mounted, Leslie found herself facing a choice she could no longer avoid: continue to maintain her carefully guarded silence or risk everything by revealing what she knew. The weight of that decision was evident in her increasingly erratic behavior, as moments of defiance gave way to hesitation, and her once firm denials began to sound less certain, more like a shield than a statement of truth. It became clear that whatever she was hiding was not just about Darlene, but about something deeper, something rooted in a past that had never truly been laid to rest. In a dramatic and emotionally charged sequence, Leslie finally broke down during a confrontation with someone who refused to let her deflect any longer. Her words, though fragmented and incomplete, offered the first real glimpse into the truth she had been concealing, not a confession of murder, but an admission of involvement in something that had set these events into motion long before Darlene's death. She spoke of a mistake, a betrayal, and a decision that had seemed justified at the time but had now come back to haunt her in ways she never anticipated. While she stopped short of admitting direct responsibility, her revelation confirmed that her connection to Darlene's fate was far from incidental. And yet, even with this partial truth exposed, the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. Too many pieces were still missing, too many questions left unanswered. Who was the other person at the scene? What exactly had Darlene been planning to reveal? And, perhaps most importantly, was Leslie's role one of intent or consequence? As the story continued to unfold, one thing became increasingly clear. Darlene's death was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something far more explosive, a chain reaction of truths and lies that would ultimately force everyone involved to confront the past they had tried so hard to escape. In true soap opera fashion, the lines between victim and villain blurred with every passing moment, leaving viewers questioning not just what happened, but